This year, our community was honored to welcome the renowned author Malcolm Gladwell as a speaker, a visit that afforded me the opportunity to begin a dialogue with him and acquaint myself with his prolific and always insightful writing. Today, as we're about to begin the Yizkor service, I want to draw attention to one particular idea of Gladwell's that he describes in his book, The Tipping Point, called Transactive Memory, a term drawn from the work of University of Virginia psychologist Daniel Wegner. In every age, and none more than our own, we're aware that memory isn't stored just within us, but it's also something that can be shared. On a mundane level, here at work, we have something called a shared hard drive, an electronic place where documents are stored. It doesn't belong to me, to the cantor, to anyone else. We access it, we add to it the shared memory of the professional team. And with each passing day, we're aware that there are vast and growing pockets of memory that are no longer housed within us, but beyond the membrane of our being. There was a time that I could recall phone numbers and addresses of all my friends. These days, because all the information is accessible on my phone, I do not need to remember such information, and thus, not surprisingly, do not. We only need to remember where we can find the information, not so much the information itself. In our information age, there's an increasingly large amount of what we used to store in our own person that is now housed in what I'll call off-site locations not of our own person. Wegner's research goes on to explain that the external locations of our memory, it's stored not just in other things, but a Rolodex, a USB stick, or iPhone, but it's stored in other people. In the relationships of our lives with people we know well, we create what he calls an implicit joint memory system, a transactive memory system, which is based on an understanding about who is best suited to remember what kind of things. When my phone stops working, for example, the memory of how to fix it is not stored in me, but my teenage daughter to whom I hand my phone. I have no idea how to suspend home delivery of the New York Times when we go away. Debbie knows how to do that, and for that matter, a million other things. So too, there exists a smaller, significantly smaller circle of things that I remember how to do, that somewhere, someone relies on me to remember. It's a bit like the story of the Goldsteins, who were out with the Cohens sitting at the pool discussing the name of a fabulous restaurant Goldstein had just been to. And Goldstein was regaling his friends about the service, the food, everything, absolutely first rate. "No," said Cohen, "so what was the name of the place?" "Gee, I can't remember," Goldstein replied, thinking, "but what do you call that long stem flower that people give to each other on special occasions?" "You mean a rose?" said Cohen. "That's it," Goldstein explained, at which point he turns to his wife and says, "Rose, what's the name of the restaurant we went to the other night?" The names of restaurants, a million things. We rely on the memories of others, the shared memories that become the bonds of a relationship. To use a sweet but altogether relevant example, my love and trust and bond with Cantor Schwartz is based on many things, but a big part of the friendship, professionally and personally, is the fact that we have a form of transactive memory, collectively shared together. The way couples can finish sentences, remember commitments, tell family stories. The measure of our intimacy with another person is based in no small part on the degree to which a percentage of our memory actually lives within another person. It's the people with whom we have the most transactive memory that are the people that more often than not we are closest to personally, professionally, and otherwise. All of which makes it really, really hard when someone dies. Because the loss of a loved one, a parent, a child, a sibling, a spouse, an intimate or otherwise, is a devastating blow on so many levels. Our grief and our sorrow at their passing, a life cut short and concluded, the gaping hole left as we, the living, are asked to engage with living in the absence of the person we love so. But what Wegner's study adds to the nature of loss is that in the loss of our loved one, part of us literally, not just figuratively, literally dies. We love that person because that person was part of our memory. Their experiences were our experiences and ours theirs. With the loss of a loved one, the shared hard drive, if you will, crashes. All those things, mundane and momentous, how we navigate the world, how we relate to other people, how we recall the past, and how we dream about the future, all that and so much more was them, but was also us, and that is lost when our loved one dies. They and only they knew certain things about us, our history, things that nobody else knew. Wegner explains that it's this loss of self in losing a loved one that is, at least in some part, a source of the cognitive dysfunction that people experience upon the death of a loved one. We are no longer literally wholly ourselves. In Wegner's words, a feeling akin to losing a part of one's mind. All of which is to say, what, if you're sitting here during this time, you already know, which is what the act of Yizkor is really about. Significantly, the word Yizkor is not a noun. It's a verb denoting the act of remembering, of retrieving memory. As God remembers us on this day, so too we remember our loved ones. We mourn their passing, we honor their lives, and in our sorrow we seek comfort in our tradition and in community. And yet, perhaps, embedded in the act of Yizkor, the act of remembering, there's another expectation, another dimension to our retrieval of memory that we can consider today. Because if indeed, in the passing of our loved one, a piece of us also died that day, then today, this Yizkor hour becomes a time when we meditate on that missing piece. Today, we miss the things our loved one knew how to do and when they did them, because those things, they were part of us. The wisdom they possessed, the habits they had, the songs they sang, and the foods they cooked. The holidays are an especially difficult and important time to remember our loved ones because it's during these sacred hours and in this space that so much of our intergenerational memory can be found. The act of Yizkor cannot bring a loved one back, nor can it make us whole once more. Our loved one's mortality is an unavoidable fact. And yet the gift of memories is ours should we choose to accept it. We can use these moments to meditate on those blessings of those whom we recall today. We can, if even for a fleeting moment, in their absence, bring about their presence. And the power of Yizkor goes even deeper. Because if indeed it is the case that when our loved one passed, a piece of us died with them, then it means so too we must allow for the corollary to be true as well, namely that an aspect of our loved one still lives within us today. To state the obvious, we are living and are still here. Our loved ones living no longer were our loved ones because there was an aspect of his or her being that existed within each of us. We're not just keepers of a memory that a certain person lived, but for as long as we live, we are the actual sites, the locations in which an aspect of our loved one continues. The act of Yizkor is meant to be a prompt to alert us of the obligations we have as guardians of the memories of our loved one. What does it mean, in practical terms, to say that it is through me that a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a child, or a spouse lives on? How do we express our responsibility? How do we express the opportunity to perpetuate the values, the ideals, the traditions by which our loved one lived? We know from the words of the Machzor that our loved ones can, if we so choose, stay alive in our own actions, an aspect of them through each of us. Yizkor is our time not just to remember. Yizkor is our time to commit to action, to map out the future, to make resolutions, and to make our lives the living and dynamic monuments to all those whom we recall today. Finally, if we take the idea of transactive memory to heart, then we must at some point allow for, reflect, and absorb the fact that just as an aspect of our loved ones lives on in each of us, so too an aspect of us may be found at this time or at any time in the hearts, the lives, and souls of those who will outlive us. Someday, perhaps sooner than we might think, and most likely sooner than we would want, someone, please God, will be reciting Yizkor prayers for us. So I ask you, in the limited time we have been extended on this earth, in the relationships that define your existence, with those people with whom you share your being, are you satisfied? One of the most painful aspects of Yizkor is the inevitable feeling of the things we should have and could have said to our loved one before they passed, but for whatever reason chose not to. Yizkor is our wake-up call to the realization that while we cannot change the past, we can change the future. We can commit to living loving, value-filled lives of meaning. We can, if we so choose, make the changes that need to be made, those important conversations we must have with our loved ones. We can create memory bank after memory bank with those dear, so when it's time for us to be remembered, not only will our legacies live on beyond our years, but will be remembered lovingly, fondly, and perhaps even beyond the horizon of what we can see today. Friends, the redemptive moments of our people are preceded, we know, by the act of remembering. God remembering the Israelites in Egypt, the cupbearer remembering Joseph in the prison, and Mordecai remembering the king in the Purim story, the king remembering Mordecai in the Purim story. It is the act of remembering these moments upon which our redemption is to be found, where our past meets our present and our charge for the future becomes clear. Here and now, this time can be such a moment if we let it. May we draw on the gift of memory, recalling our loved ones faithfully and lovingly, and find comfort in their presence and the presence of each other, and thus commit to living lives worthy of being remembered. Amen.